Hey guys, SGT here. I've got Jeff Nielson on the line from Bullionbullscanada. Jeff, we haven't spoken in seems like 3-4 months. How are you?
Not too bad, John. Keeping busy. How about yourself?
We're keeping busy too, and it seems like there's almost too much to keep up with on a daily basis. So Jeff, you've been cranking out a lot of articles lately. I read one yesterday called Silver, Shorting Consumes, Investing Conserves. What's your take on what we're seeing in the markets right now as it pertains to silver and gold specifically?
Well, in general terms, I'm just really concerned about the tone coming out of the mainstream media and the message. And basically, it's the continued demonization of so-called speculators and hoarders, while this same propaganda machine totally ignores the outrages being committed on the short side of the market.
And there are outrages being committed on the short side of the market. The CFTC, Bart Chilton specifically, has Gary Gensler in his camp to some degree, and they're claiming that they're going to put an end to some of this mischief here in the near future. But until they do, and Bart Chilton has said that once they finally come to an agreement on defining what a swap is, it'll still take 60 days to implement the new regulations, which gives the criminal organization known as J.P. Morgan lots of time to continue, having their way with this market.
Well, I know that Mr. Chilton has gotten a lot of good press in the precious metal sector, and, I'm personally wondering if it's deserved. When I talk about, the tone and the rhetoric coming out of the media, he is one of the individuals to whom I'm referring. While he talks about problems in the silver market, if you'll look carefully at what he says in his own speeches, he too always uses the word speculator. You will never see Bart Chilton use the word short when he's criticizing what's taking place in the silver market. And so I am extremely concerned that when the dust settles and the CFTC actually announces something, that if anything is being done at all, that is going to be an attack on the speculators, the longs in the market.
Before we talk about your article here, Silver Shorting Consumes, Investing Conserves, in which you compared the shorting of the silver market to what if these criminals did this to the chocolate market, it destroys markets. Let's just, for the audience, level set, and let's talk a little bit about why precious metals are still such a great alternative for people in a world gone mad. And I want to cite MF Global specifically as an example because here's a case of an agent of the Fed led by the former head of Goldman Sachs, John Corzine, in which money has just literally disappeared. People, even with money market accounts, people who had money in cash with MF Global wake up one day with 40, 50, 60% of their cash gone. And in a world gone mad, in a world dominated by derivatives, this is what can happen. So when guys like Lindsay Williams say, if you only have paper assets, you're going to lose all of your money in the next year or two, this is exactly what he's talking about. We're seeing it happen right before our eyes. Now, with physical precious metals, you have something real. You have something that can't be stolen from you. Having said that, there is a huge problem with shorting paper in this market and J.P. Morgan and the criminal banks. Tell us why shorting, uncontrolled shorting, unregulated shorting, is such a disaster for a market.
Well, I think it's even more general than that. I would argue that shorting is an activity which is inherently destructive, period. And it's simply, when we see the extreme examples that it becomes so obvious. But, the point is, when people understand how shorting actually operates, it's really hard to see, where there's any sort of benign purpose for this. Basically, what shorting is for people that aren't familiar with this type of transaction is it's, generally speaking, a bet that the price of something is going to go down. And the way the mechanism works is that the person wishing to make that bet is supposed to borrow the position they wish to short, sell it onto the market, and then presumably buy it back in the future at a lower price, which is where they make their profit. And, there are many problems with this whole concept of shorting. Obviously the one that's gotten a lot of attention is the fact that it's not properly regulated and that many of the shorts are allowed to engage in naked shorting, and that's nothing less than the counterfeiting of shares. But, even if it's done in legitimate terms, this is an activity which is obviously destructive of markets. You're taking something and you're dumping it onto the market. And, we have such negative connotations about the word dumping in economics that it just amazes me that shorting continues to get this benign treatment by the media when it's totally unjustified.
Let's talk a little bit, though, about the manipulation of a commodity, and in this case, silver. You note that in the 1990s, the price of silver was manipulated by J.P. Morgan to a 600-year low in real dollars. We know that this was manipulation because it was below the cost of production, and I think that's your point. So as it pertains to silver prices today, Jeff, even at 30, 35, 40. If we take a look at the inflation-adjusted all-time high in silver, the real high in silver isn't $50. It's closer to $150. And if you take a look at John Williams in Shadow Stats, he'll tell you that the actual inflation-adjusted real all-time high in silver is $456 an ounce, and that's 2 years ago. That doesn't take into account any of the latest money printing. So the point is that even at today's prices, I've gotten to the point, Jeff, where I don't care anymore. When silver's down $1, when silver's down $2, I literally don't care anymore. It used to bother me. It used to have a bit of an emotional effect on me. It doesn't now because I know how messed up the world financial picture is. Take a look at MF Global. Take a look at Bernie Madoff. Take a look at Bank of America. This entire Ponzi scheme is about ready to melt down, and so I sleep well at night knowing that I have some physical silver.
And, even beyond the basic parameters for the commodity and for silver as money, there's just the more fundamental aspect here, which you essentially alluded to with the discussion of MF Global, and it's the lack of counterparty risk. If you hold an asset in your own possession that's solely owned by you, that's not some paper derivative of some other entity, there's no way that asset can go to zero in your possession. Whereas with any quote-unquote investment, where you are holding an interest in something where that asset is held in the possession of somebody else, you are exposed to counterparty risk. And, of course, this also applies to many investments within the precious metal sector, and there I'm specifically thinking of the so-called bullion ETFs.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to flesh that out even one step further, you brought up MF Global again. As it pertains to counterparty risk, if we look at MF Global, when you are invested, no matter where your money is, no matter who it is with, if it is in paper, there is a trust factor. There is a honor of working markets. There is a justice factor that needs to be in play or you will be stolen from. In the case of MF Global, they did the ultimate sin on Wall Street, which is to commingle funds. There's no easier, faster, greater way to destroy investor confidence than to commingle funds as they were doing, which is why when they were 60, 70 to 1 levered and their trade turned against them, they not only lost all their corporation's money, they lost their investors' money. So the point that you're making with precious metals, which is just so important, is that when you have a silver ounce coin in your possession, when you have a kilo bar of silver or a 10-ounce bar of gold, it's real money. Nobody can steal it from you. That's the beauty of it, and that's really the point that needs to be driven home, isn't it?
Well, and, I even look at this going back to my own younger days when I was going through law school and finding out about how the legal profession worked. And, there's basically only one way you can get thrown out of the legal profession, and that's if you run off with some client money. You can get away with almost anything else. You steal some client money and you get tossed out. And the reason, of course, is because it's very, very important to lawyers that they be considered trustworthy with client money. And, so this is what makes the situation with MF Global and some of these other frauds that are coming to light so surprising and outrageous, that, the one thing that these bankers want to do is portray themselves as being trustworthy with money.
Right.
And so you see these scandals erupt, and, of course, that totally shatters the image. And if it wasn't for the propaganda machine glossing over these massive frauds over and over and over again, and the regulators handing out these ridiculous wrist slaps where the criminals don't even have to admit wrongdoing, that trust would have already been totally shattered because, of course, these people are no longer even engaging in subtle, scams, but it's just basically acts of blatant theft.
Yeah, it's absolutely 100% blatant, in-your-face theft. And for anybody that might still be on the fence, for anybody new to whom somebody that is one of our regular listeners might forward this interview, if you're sitting on the fence thinking this is all, oh, this wouldn't happen to me, or this is puffery, these guys are taking this a little too far. John Corzine was the head of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is so deeply in bed with the government and the Fed that it defies belief. We have lost rule of law in this country. Once you commingle funds and steal your investors' money, it's game over. So I just need people to understand, and you even write, quote, in your latest article, quote, there has been an incessant flow of inane media drivel that silver prices are already, quote, high. We can utterly disprove that nonsense in two different ways. As you noted, Jeff, in your latest commentary, you say, we have a 5,000-year price relationship to guide us when it comes to whether silver prices are high or low. The gold-silver ratio, for instance, that 5,000-year ratio has hovered around 15 to 1, and you note that that would make the natural price of silver today, the unmanipulated price, closer to $120 an ounce.
And, of course, that doesn't even get into the fact that gold prices are suppressed, and, were it not for the suppression of the gold market, the price of gold would be, significantly higher, making that natural price of silver that much further beyond that $120 mark.
Absolutely, absolutely. Gold is also suppressed. If J.P. Morgan is running the silver paper games, then I believe it's HSBC on the gold side. Is that not the case?
That's correct. And let me just add one more little point here, because it's something that people might wonder about, or, of course, it's a criticism that often gets raised when we talk about the gold-silver ratio. And that's, you get the argument that, of course, it's not silver that's undervalued, but it's gold that's, quote-unquote, overvalued. And, the obvious response to that argument is simply to shout out the two words, competitive devaluation. As long as the official monetary and economic policy of our governments is to drive down the value of our currencies, that literally means exactly the same thing as intentionally driving up the prices of goods. So suggesting that gold or any commodity is overvalued today is something that's generally specious on its very surface.
Well, very well said, Jeff. And I just want to leave folks with this. We've got a couple minutes left before we lose you. Silver is the people's money. And one of your latest commentaries says just that, silver, the people's money. Tell us why, Jeff.
Well, the whole method of scamming people through fractional reserve banking is simply to get people to hold paper. If you get the people to hold paper, you can dilute the paper and then thus essentially steal their wealth, through this serial dilution. So if the people are holding silver, then suddenly this fractional reserve game of theft doesn't work, because it doesn't cause any adverse effect on us if the bankers are diluting their paper if we're all holding silver.
And Jeff, just so people understand, the way I see it, I want to know if you see it the same way. The end game is in play here. The system internationally is looking more and more like a house of cards, and in fact, I think that house of cards is falling. So for folks who are still sitting on the sidelines, and I know a lot of them, Jeff, I work with them, they know what my position is on precious metals, and they're just not that interested. They don't think that they don't see things through the same lens that you and I do. For people who don't think it's going to get all that bad, how do we help those folks understand that A, it's not too late to get in and buy some physical precious metals, and B, it's really stupid not to?
Well, I'll fall back again on those two words, competitive devaluation. While there are so many fundamental reasons to shift your wealth into precious metals, this one, to me, is just so simple and obvious. We have governments literally and explicitly saying, we're racing to drive the value of our currencies towards zero. Racing. That's what they mean by competitive. And so, they were doing a good enough job of destroying our currencies before they were competing, and, now they're doing it deliberately. And so, people have their warning. Our governments are literally trying to destroy our paper money, and if you hold your wealth in paper, your wealth will be destroyed with that paper.
Jeff Nielson from Bullionbullscanada, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Sean. Always a pleasure to be here.
No, it's always great to talk with you, Jeff.
Okay, take it easy, Sean.
We'll talk to you soon.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, friends, thanks for all your support. Be sure to check out sgtreport.com for all the latest.